So today I want to talk about one of the most terrifying collapse scenarios possible and why it's also the most likely. Let's get to it. So we've all been misled by Hollywood movies to believe that a collapse is going to be abrupt, that 1 second things are going to be good and the next second things are going to be terrible. Everybody's just going to be going crazy. Everybody's going to be depraved and deprived. And we're going to be fighting over the final morsels of food that remain. But is it really going to be like that? Or is it going to be something far, far more terrifying than that? Maybe some of you are familiar with the quote, "This is how the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper." A lot of people are banking on the lines being drawn right away. This is what you can do, this is what you can't. You see, in an abrupt breakdown of society, in a zombie apocalypse, as they're depicted in the movies, where suddenly, over the course of 48 hours, the world is thrust into chaos. The benefit of a situation like that is you know what you can get away with. But if there's still this pseudo rule of law in place that interferes with your ability to either defend yourself or do whatever you have to do to survive, that's a far worse predicament when you think about it. When you think about the gradual deterioration and the breakdown, I'm talking about a multi-decadal disintegration of society to the point where it looks like that movie Elysium, which was probably the most accurate depiction in post-apocalyptic movies or dystopian movies. And usually gradual collapse will resemble a dystopia because you're going to have these fiefdoms of extreme order and control amidst a sea of anarchy and lawlessness and chaos, because these two things complement one another. The only way you can have any order in a sea of chaos and anarchy is if it's ruled with an iron fist. Not many people like to believe that, but that's the truth in a lot of cases. That's why you had the feudal system and castles and kings and, harsh capital punishments and whatnot that came with that. You had to rule with an iron fist when you're living in the jungle, okay? Because there's bad guys, there's raiders that want to take your stuff. So you need walls and you need very strict rules, and you need threats of extreme punishment if people violate those rules. Otherwise, the whole thing just goes under. I think a lot of people are hoping that it's going to happen quickly because we know that that's going to be easier to navigate. How do you prepare for a multi-decadal deterioration and collapse scenario? How do you prepare for that? You can't prepare for that. Even if you have a homestead, if the aquifers and the wells run dry and there's no water and you can't grow crops because there's some blight or whatever the case might be, there's a lot of scenarios where just running off into the countryside, you're not going to be all right. Okay, in this type of scenario I'm talking about, this is why it's so terrifying, because many people would be forced either into these pockets of excessive rule of law, or you can go and roam the wasteland and just scavenge and probably resort to doing all sorts of crazy things in order to survive. You see, the thing is that zombie movies have greatly misled us. They've convinced us that collapse happens in two parts. There's the falling out, there's the outbreak, and then there is the aftermath, which is the long tail of the story. The apocalypse and the post-apocalypse. The apocalypse happens very quickly in most movies. There's a bang, okay? And then there's the aftermath, and people survive in that post-apocalyptic world. That's a much easier world to navigate than the Hunger Games. Why? In a clear-cut scenario where there's a bang and then there's an aftermath, you're free to make your own laws and rules. And that's what most people want. Most people want the volition to choose. And that is definitely part of the allure to doomsday thinking, is that everybody wants to be their own boss. There's a lot more to it than that, and I've went into great depth about the psychology of why people think about this stuff, because I'm always trying to do my own self-analysis to figure out why I do what I do, why I prep. So there would be no psychologist that can catch me off guard and say, this is why you prep, because you're insecure because you and your dad had this kind of relationship, or whatever the case. I've thought about it all, okay? Part of the reason is that people truly want the freedom that comes of having no laws, no rules. You know, you write your own story. Everybody wants to be the author in their own story. Everybody wants to be the protagonist, okay? But here's the terrifying thought, is that you may not be the protagonist. Everybody wants to be the hero in the story. You may be the antagonist, or even worse, you may be the NPC, the non-playable character. You may be the foot soldier. You may be one of the zombies, even the people who've prepared for all of it. Yes, you may just be another unconscious automaton who acts on the whim of their limbic system, moving from one self-sustaining act to the next, just trying to survive. Okay, that's what a zombie is. And we've all been conditioned by Hollywood to believe a few things: that it's going to happen abruptly, and that we are going to be the heroes. And video games have done their fair share to convince people that they're going to be able to do things which are just physically impossible. And when people fantasize about this freedom, they forget that there's no pause button. Okay, you cannot press pause after you're in the shit. What we need to fear the most is a gradual breakdown of society. Long-winded, long-tail suffering. It's not going to be a decapitation. It is going to be wandering in the desert, dying of thirst for days and days on end, if I was to use a metaphor to describe what it would actually be like, what it's shaping up to be like. And that's a terrifying thought, because we all know that with a gradual collapse like that, where you still have the inequality of freedom, because let's face it, in this society, freedom is not equal. Some people have more freedom than others. If you are a high-ranking member of society, you can get away with a lot more. You write the rules, right? You make the laws. And if collapse happens gradually, that inequality is going to become more and more magnified to the point where you're living in a dystopia and you have no rights and no freedoms. Either you can choose between having no rights and no freedoms, or having all the freedom you want, but there's nothing there to be had. You can have your freedom in the wasteland, where there's not going to be anything to eat, and you're not going to be able to sleep more than 5 minutes without somebody or something trying to kill you. Or you can live under an iron fist and have no rights and freedoms whatsoever, and just exist to do some work for somebody else. That increasingly becomes the choice, and that is potentially what we're up against. What do you guys think? What would you prefer, a gradual breakdown or an abrupt breakdown? I would prefer the abrupt breakdown, even though I know it's far less likely to go down that way. Even the Roman Empire's collapse took a long, long time to collapse. It wasn't abrupt. See, most of the predictions that I make on this channel come true eventually. Usually my timelines are way too aggressively short. I'll admit that. You know, it's one part urgency and the excitement of it all. The other part of that is just being conditioned to think that these things happen quickly when they don't. It's not with a bang, it's with a whimper. These things are going to happen gradually. So we need to be prepared for a slow burn collapse. So yeah, how do you prepare for the gradual breakdown of all things? You can't prepare for it. I mean, you can, but you can only store so much food. There's that scene in the movie In the Road where they meet that one guy and they're talking about how it all went down, and he's telling them, like, you know, even if you knew this was coming, how would you have prepared for it? Because it was years and years that they spent roaming this wasteland. How could you prepare for so many years unless you have a lot of money to play with? Most people aren't going to be able to do that. So the only way to do it then is to make it into a lifestyle. And that's why the trajectory of growth for most preppers is you start at the bug out bag and you end up on a homestead. That's where I hope to end up someday.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, your one-stop shop for premium, high-quality, brand-name products that have been tried and tested by myself and other YouTube gear reviewers. My subscribers save 10% off by using the coupon code SURVIVALPREPPER. All one word in all caps.